Ever heard the chilling tale of a music icon whose luxury car was found abandoned on a quiet country road? No signs of struggle, no goodbye, just silence? One day they were filling stadiums, the next, gone without a trace. No final show, no farewell track, just a haunting silence where music used to be. These are the black musicians who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and unfinished songs. Their stories aren't just mysteries, they're heartbreaks set to silence.
Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson.
Deep in the sweltering heat of Mississippi, 1938, a young bluesman named Robert Johnson played the guitar like he was channeling something not of this world. His fingers moved like fire, fast, fluid, unexplainable. One moment he was singing about hellhounds chasing him down.
The next, he was dead.
Just 27 years old.
No doctor. No clear cause.
Just silence and whispers.
Dark whispers.
Legend has it he made a deal at a crossroads. Traded his soul to the devil in exchange for supernatural talent. And when you make that kind of deal, the devil always comes to collect. You see, Robert wasn't always a guitar god. In fact, he was once terrible. So bad that other musicians would laugh him off stage.
Then one day, he vanished. Weeks passed. Maybe months.
And when he came back, he played like no man alive. Like something had changed. People who saw him said he'd play with his back turned, eyes fixed on some invisible presence, like he was being guided by hands no one else could see.
And those songs?
They weren't just music. They were warnings. Me and the Devil Blues. Hellhound on my trail. Lyrics soaked in dread, like he knew exactly how his story would end, and that there was no way out.
The official story? Poisoned.
They say a jealous husband, angry that Johnson had gotten too close to his wife, slipped something into his whiskey one night at a dusty juke joint. Robert collapsed, screaming, crawling in agony for days. But no one was ever arrested.
No one paid.
His death certificate? A flimsy piece of paper, more rumor than record. For decades, no one even knew where his body truly lay. Some say an unmarked grave. Others claim 3 different burial sites. Like even in death, Robert Johnson couldn't find peace. Or maybe, someone made sure he never would. And just like that, the most mysterious man in blues vanished, leaving behind music that felt more like a curse than a gift, and a legend that still chills the bone.
Jesse Belvin. Jesse Belvin.
February 6, 1960.
Little Rock, Arkansas.
A city boiling with hate, a place where being black meant living on edge every single day. But that night, Jesse did something bold, even revolutionary. He stepped on stage and performed in the first integrated concert the city had ever seen. Black and white faces sitting side by side under the same roof, swaying to the same rhythm. His voice, smooth as velvet, wrapped around the crowd with hits like Goodnight My Love. But beneath the music, the air crackled with tension. There had already been threats. Twice, white supremacists tried to shut the show down. Hours later, Jesse, his wife Joanne, and their driver were found crushed inside the twisted wreck of their Cadillac.
All 3 gone.
Just like that. Police wasted no time calling it an accident. Another sleepy driver, another tragic crash.
Case closed.
But not everyone bought that story. Witnesses, even a state trooper, saw something that chilled them to the bone. Jesse's tires, cut, slashed, tampered with. One man swore they looked sabotaged, the kind of dirty trick that turns a speeding car into a death trap, especially on a dark southern highway. Jesse Belvin wasn't just a rising star. He was a black man breaking barriers, bringing his music to audiences some folks thought he had no business reaching. And in a town that hated change, that kind of courage might have signed his death warrant. Artists like Jackie Wilson were convinced this wasn't an accident. It was a message.
A warning. But no one listened. No investigation. No arrests. No justice. Just silence.
Some farewells come with screams and shattering metal. Others drift away quietly, like a candle flickering out. Jesse Belvin, a voice that once promised so much, became another ghost in America's long shadow, remembered not just for the songs he sang, but for the dream that may have cost him his life.
Henry Grimes.
Imagine this, it's the 1960s, and you're Henry Grimes, a fearless trailblazing jazz bassist lighting up stages with legends like Albert Ayler, Cecil Taylor, and Don Cherry. You're not just playing music, you're bending sound, breaking rules, redefining jazz itself.
Then one day, you vanish.
No farewell, no final gig, not even a whispered goodbye.
Just gone.
For nearly 30 years, the jazz world was stunned. How could one of the most electric minds of the avant-garde just disappear?
Did he burn out?
Retreat into some secret underground? Or was there a darker truth no one dared speak aloud? Fans didn't know whether to mourn or to hope. Whispers replaced applause. What happened to Henry Grimes? Became a ghost story jazz lovers told each other in hushed tones. As time passed, his name began slipping from liner notes and history books. His basses were scattered or forgotten. People assumed the worst, another genius consumed by a wild life too intense to last. But then, out of nowhere, in 2002, a jazz-loving social worker named Marshall Marat decided to follow a hunch. Armed with nothing but an old address and sheer determination, he tracked Henry down.
And where was he?
Not in some faraway retreat or hidden music sanctuary, but in a cramped, one-room apartment in Los Angeles, working tough labor jobs.
He didn't even own a bass. He hadn't played in decades.
Life had been cruel. But Henry hadn't meant to leave the stage forever. He just got lost in the noise of the world. And if that wasn't wild enough, imagine a fierce queen of raw funk, burning with talent, who chose to silence herself rather than scream for fame. A woman who walked away from the spotlight, not because she had to, but because she wanted peace more than applause.
Betty Davis. Betty Davis.
Just picture her for a second. Not the Hollywood actress, but Betty Davis, the wild, untamed queen of funk. She didn't just sing, she growled, snarled, and howled with a sound so raw, so unapologetically nasty, it made grown men blush and had music execs scrambling for cover. Her energy was electric. Married for a time to jazz legend Miles Davis, and rubbing shoulders with icons like Jimi Hendrix and Sly Stone, Betty wasn't just in the scene, she was the scene.
Her concerts?
They were explosions of fearless female power, part rock show, part rebellion, and all attitude. In the 1970s, Betty Davis didn't just push boundaries, she bulldozed through them like she came from another planet.
A louder, funkier, freer one.
Then just as her music started shaking the industry, she disappeared. Vanished. After releasing 3 groundbreaking albums, They Say I'm Different, Nasty Gal, and Is It Love or Desire? Records that would go on to earn cult status, she walked away from it all.
No slow fade. No goodbye tour. Just silence.
Like she slammed the door, locked it, and threw the key into the ocean.
What happened?
Was she blackballed by an industry too scared of her power? Too threatened by her refusal to be tamed? For nearly 40 years, Betty lived in near-total isolation in Pittsburgh.
Rumors swirled. Was she broke? Bitter?
Broken by the business? But when fragments of her story resurfaced in articles and a powerful documentary before her passing in 2022, the truth proved far more human. Betty Davis didn't vanish because she was defeated. She left because she chose to. She rejected an industry she saw as fake, limiting, and soul-crushing. She didn't want to be packaged, marketed, or sold. She wanted to be remembered on her own terms, as the woman who burned too hot for the world to handle. And in doing so, she left behind not just a legacy of music, but a legend of resistance.
Hazel Scott. Hazel Scott.
Imagine being so immensely gifted, so dazzlingly talented, that you break every barrier in your path, becoming the very first Black American to host your own television show on a national network. That was Hazel Scott in the 1940s and early 50s. A virtuoso pianist who played with effortless brilliance, a glamorous jazz singer, a rising Hollywood star, and a fearless civil rights activist, Hazel wasn't just a performer, she was a force of nature. A symbol of elegance, defiance, and undeniable excellence. But then came the Red Scare. The shadowy grip of McCarthyism began to choke the brightest voices in America, and Hazel's brilliance made her a target. She didn't fade away quietly, she was pushed. She spoke out boldly against racism and injustice in Hollywood, refused to perform for segregated audiences, and stood up to powerful institutions without flinching. But in 1950, her name appeared in red channels, a blacklist branding her a supposed communist sympathizer. Guilt by association, punished for having a spine. Hazel did what few dared. She testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee and stood her ground, calling out the witch hunts for what they were, fear-driven attacks that ruined innocent lives. But courage wasn't enough. Just days later, her groundbreaking TV show was cancelled.
Offers dried up. Doors slammed shut.
And just like that, America turned its back on one of its brightest stars. She didn't disappear in the way someone vanishes without a trace.
No, Hazel Scott was erased.
Silenced not by illness or accident, but by politics, racism, and fear. They didn't just blacklist her, they blacklisted a legacy. At the height of her fame, they made her vanish from the spotlight she had fought so hard to claim. This wasn't just a career lost. It was a voice, a movement, a cultural force, snuffed out, not by weakness, but by a system that couldn't stand her power.
Little Willie John.
Little Willie John. Man, that voice was something otherworldly. It didn't just sing, it hit you. Like a storm breaking through your soul. One minute, it roared like a hurricane, the next, it whispered heartbreak that could shatter you into 1,000 pieces. These weren't just songs. They were pure emotion, raw, electric, unforgettable. He was tiny in size, barely more than 5 feet tall, but when he opened his mouth to sing, the room belonged to him. By the time most kids were still figuring out life, Willie was already a chart-topping R&B sensation in the 1950s, pouring everything he had into every single note. But behind that towering talent was a fuse burning way too fast. His voice wasn't the only thing explosive, his temper was just as legendary. And with lives that burn that hot, the fall usually comes hard, dark, and wrapped in mystery.
In 1964, everything changed. A fight broke out in Seattle. One man died.
Willie claimed it was self-defense, that he was trying to protect himself, but the court didn't see it that way. He was convicted of manslaughter and sent to Washington State Penitentiary. Imagine it, a man who once made crowds scream with joy now reduced to a number behind cold steel bars. The same voice that filled theaters was now echoing through prison walls. But the real tragedy wasn't just the conviction, it was what came next. In May of 1968, just 30 years old and still filled with music the world would never hear, Little Willie John died in that prison hospital.
The official cause? A heart attack.
But for a young man in decent health, that explanation didn't sit right with a lot of people. Whispers started spreading, louder than his hit singles once were. Did the guards rough him up? Was he denied medical care? Did his fiery past catch up to him in a place where revenge and power games never sleep? His family never believed the story. His fans still don't. Too many unanswered questions. Too many shadows over those final hours. It didn't feel like a natural death, it felt like a silence that had been forced. A voice snuffed out behind walls where secrets thrive and truth dies quietly. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all. Some legends don't just vanish from the spotlight, they're buried by the very world that once celebrated them.
And Little Willie John? He didn't just fade away.
He was taken, swallowed by a system that never knew what to do with brilliance wrapped in chaos.
D'Angelo.
D'Angelo wasn't just praised, he was anointed. Critics didn't call him a great singer, they called him the new king of soul, the savior of real music. When Voodoo dropped in 2000, it wasn't just an album, it was a revolution. A hypnotic blend of funk, gospel, jazz, and raw emotion, it drove fans wild and critics into a frenzy. It won Grammys, topped charts, and crowned D'Angelo as the future of soul. With his smoldering good looks, that quiet brooding aura, and a voice so smooth it could melt stone, he wasn't just a star, he was the star.
The chosen one. But then, he vanished.
Right after the intimate, now iconic Untitled, How Does It Feel video, which turned him into an overnight sex symbol, whether he liked it or not, D'Angelo backed away.
Way back.
For 14 years, he disappeared from the spotlight. No new albums, no concerts, no interviews, just silence.
Fans whispered.
The industry speculated. Where did D'Angelo go? He wasn't missing, exactly. But it felt like he'd ghosted the entire music world. Some said the pressure broke him, that he never wanted to be a pin-up idol, that the obsession with his body stripped away the focus on his artistry. Others pointed to addiction, perfectionism, or the toxic demands of an industry that eats its brightest stars alive. Every so often, rumors would swirl. He's back in the studio, new music is coming.
But then, nothing. Silence. Again. Years passed.
Voodoo became sacred text. Fans listened to it like scripture, searching for hidden messages, clues, anything to explain the mystery. And the longer he stayed gone, the more mythical he became. Then, out of the shadows, in 2014, Black Messiah.
A triumphant return. A resurrection.
D'Angelo came back not just older, but wiser, rawer, more powerful. But those 14 lost years? They weren't just an absence. They were a legend. A haunting chapter in the story of a man who once ruled the world, and then walked away from it.
Sun Ra.
Sun Ra wasn't just some eccentric bandleader or quirky jazz pianist. No, he was something far more cosmic. A self-declared angel from Saturn, a space-age philosopher, and a musical prophet on a mission to spread peace and higher consciousness through sound. Born with the earthly name Herman Poolblunt, he eventually shed that identity like a worn-out shell, becoming Sun Ra, a man who didn't just play music but channeled the universe through it. His style? Completely unearthly. Imagine a wild fusion of vintage swing, lightning-fast bebop, chaotic free jazz, and ancient Egyptian mysticism, then blasted into orbit. His concerts felt less like performances and more like galactic ceremonies, full of shimmering costumes, pharaoh headdresses, space-age chants, and otherworldly poetry. His band, the ever-shifting orchestra, wasn't just a group of musicians. They were disciples in a living, breathing sonic universe of his own creation. Together, they lived communally, almost like a peaceful musical cult, entirely devoted to his vision. Sun Ra claimed, with a completely straight face, that he had been abducted by aliens as a young man and transported to Saturn, where celestial beings gave him a divine mission. He wasn't bluffing. He legally changed his name to Lusoniar Ra, leaving behind Herman Blunt forever. For many who followed him, it wasn't a name change.
It was a rebirth.
Herman had vanished. In his place stood a being who walked, spoke, and performed like he had come from another dimension. The question that lingers to this day is both bizarre and haunting. Did he truly believe all of this? Or was it one of the longest, most brilliant performance art pieces in American history? Was Sun Ra a genius, a prophet, a cosmic con artist, or some magical fusion of all three? Behind the sequins, the sermons, and the Saturn stories was a man who defied reality so convincingly, we still can't decide if he ever truly belonged to it. And now, long after his return to Saturn in 1993, as his followers like to say, the mystery remains.
Not just where he went, but who he really was. A madman? A myth?
Or a messenger from the stars who left behind not just music, but a mythos, a soundscape so strange and beautiful, it made the impossible feel almost real. Jimmy Yancey. Jimmy Yancey and the ghost notes of blues history. The early days of American blues and folk music are like a faded photograph, full of mystery, half-told stories, and shadowy figures who drifted through the world leaving only whispers behind. Among them was Charles Cuckoo Davenport, a forgotten spirit of the 1920s whose music felt more like a haunting than a performance. He was a traveling bluesman, the kind whose life was barely documented, whose genius lived only in crackling old records and the fading memories of those lucky enough to hear him live.
Cuckoo wasn't just a name, it was a sound.
In the middle of his gritty, soulful guitar playing, he'd break into this eerie, bird-like yodel that stunned audiences and defied everything blues music was supposed to be. It was wild, strange, and mesmerizing. That signature sound likely earned him the nickname Cuckoo, and in 1929, he cut a handful of records for Brunswick and Vocalion. Tracks like Cuckoo Blues and Alabama Strut that still feel utterly alien, deeply haunting, and oddly ahead of their time.
And then, nothing.
After those few recordings, Charles Davenport vanished. No trace, no tour dates, no obituary, no second act. It's as if he stepped out of the shadows just long enough to leave behind a few musical footprints and then disappeared into the fog. Was Cuckoo Davenport even his real name? Or just a stage persona crafted by a man who never wanted to be found? Did he continue playing in some dusty southern juke joint, unheard and undocumented? Or did he die young, like so many wandering artists of that era, claimed by the harsh life of the road and the times he lived in? His story echoes through the silence he left behind, a silence that feels deliberate, like he'd said all he needed to say in those strange, beautiful songs. And in a way, his mystery became his legacy. Just like so many soul and blues musicians decades later, stars who burned bright for a moment and then stepped off the stage into an uneasy quiet, Cuckoo Davenport remains an unsolved song, a question mark in the margins of American music history. And maybe that's exactly how he wanted it.
Sly Stone.
Sly Stone wasn't just a musician, he was a lightning bolt of color in a world stuck in black and white. The mastermind behind Sly and the Family Stone, he blended funk, soul, rock, and psychedelia into a sound so wild and joyful it didn't just get you dancing, it made you believe in something bigger. Songs like Dance to the Music, Everyday People, and Family Affair weren't just catchy, they were anthems of unity, love, and rebellion. In the late 60s and early 70s, Sly was a force of nature, unstoppable, electrifying, and fearless. But the same fire that launched him into the stars eventually consumed him. The higher he soared, the harder he fell, and it wasn't sudden. It was a slow, heartbreaking unraveling. Paranoia crept in like poison.
Addiction gripped him.
Isolation swallowed him whole. His legendary album There's a Riot Goin' On, now hailed as a dark masterpiece, was more than just music, it was a raw, haunting reflection of his spiraling inner world. For years, Sly Stone became a ghost. Whispers floated through the industry. He was broke, living in a van, lost on the margins of the very empire he helped build. Occasionally, he'd reappear, disoriented and distant, a shell of the visionary he once was. The man who once lit up the world with joy and revolution had vanished into shadows. But here's the real question. What happens when a musical genius, right at the height of his powers, chooses to walk away, not by accident, but almost in defiance? What happens when the world keeps spinning, still dancing to his beats, while the man who created them fades into myth? And that's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, and share. It really helps keep this channel going. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.